Wait a minute, was that a cat? We really gotta do something about all these strays. I guess I would describe Betrayer as something of a cult classic. Most people haven't played it, but the ones who have generally love it, and for good reason. It's a fairly immersive, open-world game about Spanish bear people. You'll notice that most of the footage I have for this game is in full color, but I should probably mention that the default setting for this game is this black and white color palette with violent reds throughout. So when you're looking up footage or screenshots of the game, they'll probably look more like this. The options have some nice settings you can mess around with to get the exact amount of color you would prefer. Personally, I just went with bright colors since the spirit world you have to go into is gray no matter what, either way. Maybe you could argue it's against the original artistic vision of the developers to saturate the colors this much, but I'm from the Pacific Northwest and desaturated forests are against my religion. And the violent reds still stand out against all the greenery, so artistic integrity preserved, maybe. The setup for Betrayer is pretty simple. First of all, this game takes place in the early days of colonial America, and in case you need a refresher on how that's going, colonial powers, killing each other. Native tribes, killing each other. Colonial powers and native tribes, killing each other. The property rights are made up, and the treaties don't matter. Everyone is scrambling to see who can steal the most shit from the natives, and the natives are taking bets on how many dumb white people are going to die this winter from ergot poisoning because the Lord Governor took a right piss in the grain silo after too many pints. This period of history is obviously a fairly dark one and is rife with all sorts of legend and lore and tragedy that is ready to be cooked into a video game setting. Colonies just vanished without a trace all the time. Everyone was dropping dead constantly. People still very much believed in witchcraft, and the New World just sort of radiated a type of mystery that we can't even really get our heads around now that the entire thing has kind of been mapped out. Take the sense of paranoia you get from a mysterious new land that wants to kill you with wolves and weather, dotted by ghost settlements, mix in some ultra-religious European freaks and a bunch of complex tribal societies doing all kinds of cultural practices that make the Pope mad, and look out. You've got a setting for an open-world horror game, probably, I guess. Or maybe a movie? I really liked The Witch. Is colonial horror a genre? Maybe it should be. Can we get The Witch, but with the Jersey Devil? So, Betrayer opens up with the player, a silent English protagonist of ambiguous age and gender, shipwrecked on the shores of what they thought was a struggling English colony, but is now an abandoned hell place full of the ghosts of everyone who fucked around, only to tragically find out. Your goal is to talk to the ghosts and solve the various mysteries the game has to offer in whatever order you want, eventually culminating in solving the grand mystery of why this particular stretch of Virginia coast is somehow more cursed than the greater Virginia region. And before any of the clowns from these states get mad about that, yeah, I'm sure it's just a coincidence that Mothman, Hopkinsville, Indrid Cold, the Loveland Frog, and the Kecksburg UFO crash all happened inside this red circle. And those are just the ones I can remember off the top of my head. You guys live in the fucking Lost World. Come over to the West Coast, where the only thing we have to worry about is Bigfoot. Enough with this gremlins coming out of the Mammoth Cave system bullshit. Okay, I think I was talking about ghosts, but we can talk about ghosts later. For now, let's get into this game's very fun combat. Obviously, since this game takes place in 1604, we aren't going to be shooting Berettas. The game's pistols and muskets are flintlock. You get some crossbows, and the closest thing you're going to get to a semi-automatic is a bow. I haven't really talked about how absolutely incredible flintlock weapons are for video games in a long time, so I'm going to use this as a good opportunity to do that. Everything about how guns from this era of history work translates perfectly into video games, and it's a genuine crime they aren't used in game design more often. If you miss, you need to go through the laborious reload process, and if your enemies miss, they need to do the same thing. This means that player skill is highly rewarded because missing your shots is heavily punished, and avoiding enemy shots is highly rewarded.
Who is editing these scripts? How do these lines keep making it through?
The sense of tension this builds is also amazing. You never want to just take pot shots. You want to try and focus and make sure your shot lands, because if it doesn't, the guy that's currently running at you on all fours is going to get you, and that sucks. This idea of tension is played up even more in Betrayer by how slow and deliberate enemy actions are. Spanish bear ghouls will take aim for a second before firing. These skeletons have a long wind-up animation before they shoot their ghost laser, and it takes a second for the native ghosts to draw a bow. This is all to give the player just enough of a window of time to draw the pistol and get a shot off, but not so much time that they can sit there and try to get the perfect shot. It might also give you just enough time to close the gap for a melee attack, or just enough time to throw a tomahawk, but never so much time that you feel comfortable. Combat always feels like it's one mistake away from being in a blind panic, especially since enemies are pretty dangerous, particularly in the early game. And that's pretty fun. You can also make things way worse for yourself in this regard by turning up the difficulty, or playing on Dark Souls mode if you're a real psychopath. All of this would be good in any game, but it synergizes extra well with the horror themes of Betrayer. Horror is about building suspense that is then capitalized on, and nothing does that better than whiffing a shot and trying to reload in a panic. Once you get towards the end of the game and are fully decked out with all 3 weapon slots you can switch between and all your throwable items, the combat can actually get pretty intense. I almost wished that there would have been a few more big fights like this one, although I do understand that the more gritty and pseudo-realistic tone of the game probably would have been undermined by Doom 1604. All of the weapon types and some of the other itemization also add up to just enough of a variation in playstyle that you can kind of choose how you want to go into situations, which is another huge positive. You can equip up to 3 of these charms that have passive bonuses like being harder to detect, or faster reload times, or stronger melee attacks, and later in the game you will start to find unique weapons that facilitate slightly different playstyles. You could use a bunch of stealth charms and the Hunter's Longbow to snipe enemies like a Skyrim character, or stack reload speed and use something like the Trickster's Pistol and do your best to be 17th century Jonathan Wickman. Betrayer really tries to make weapon stat blocks kind of seem a little more interesting than just better gun, bigger number, and that's great to see. I don't know if the playstyles are dramatically different enough to call them builds, but they definitely have a little bit of wiggle room on which weapons you prefer using. In conclusion, combat in Betrayer is good, flintlock weapons need to be in every video game from now on, and Tomahawk hitting a Spanish guy makes a funny cartoon noise. I don't know what else you could possibly ask for here. Like most open world games, when you aren't in combat, you're exploring the world for one reason or another, which is also a large portion of Betrayer. Like all the best open world games, you can do anything in whatever order you want. 100% clear the first area, or wander all the way to the end of the game. Who cares? This is particularly fun if you've already played the game once and now you want to try to play it again and rush all the best items, or to try to play as efficiently as possible on a harder difficulty or something like that. I do think it was a little strange that you start the game with everything marked on the map, and it kind of makes the storytelling a little weird for reasons I'll bring up soon, but I also get why it was done. Most games have some kind of perk or something that reveals everything on the map anyway, so rather than having some kind of awkward dialogue with characters about marking a location on your map, or forcing you to put some kind of a skill point in some kind of explorer perk, the developers just decided to give the player all the info they need ahead of time. If you're the kind of person that likes gameplay that feels like checking off lists, then you're gonna love Betrayer. And obviously, exploration is rewarded with the best weapons and upgrades in the game, so you want to be doing it as much as possible. I can't really think of that many ways the system could be improved or anything that I would add to it. It's just exploration done right, albeit with maybe a little bit too much of the surprise taken out with the extremely detailed map information. I did find myself a little bit too reliant on the map, which is one of the reasons that I prefer systems that can get away with either not having a map at all or having a more simplified map. But I guess this is largely preference. I thought Carrion was a masterpiece for not having a map, and a lot of you cried in the comments about it. Okay, now we can get back to the ghosts. Betrayer makes an attempt to be somewhat narratively driven, and how well that works depends on how well you're able to keep track of the dozens and dozens of NPC names. There are so many fucking names in this game. Every ghost has a name. All of them are looking for like 5 other people with names. The grave markers all have names. It's a lot to keep track of. This is made even worse by every character being a featureless ghost with no voiceover and the most generic randomly generated English colonist names possible. And then made even worse by the fact that all of the wraiths and shadows, which are the ghosts you need to talk to, already have their locations marked on the map, so you don't even really need to listen to what the fuck they're saying anyway, because you start the game with the intel you probably should be getting from the NPCs. Because of all this, it can be difficult to remember what's going on and who is doing what plot-wise, since no characters have a way of standing out in your memory. I forgot the Red Lady's name like half the time, and she's literally the most important character in the game. Betrayer's various subplots and main plot are all given to you through the investigation mechanics, which are less investigations and more ringing a bell to enter the spirit world and then showing a ghost a bunch of random objects you found in the dirt until they remember whichever horrible crime they committed, which is usually one of the 3 worst ones. Eventually, you will need to finish all of the game's main investigations, which means that this is one of the rare titles that actually requires you to do something close to a 100% run. To me, the story wasn't really very gripping, mostly because my brain had a lot of trouble keeping track of so many uninteresting characters. I think most people will be reasonably happy with the way it works out. I mean, I don't think this game is historically accurate because it has flying skull demons in it and shit, but it does a pretty good job of depicting how maniacal and chaotic the early colonization of America really was. And for all of the people looking for immersion, atmosphere, and that kind of thing, Betrayer has you covered too. All of that tension that gets built up by enemies being generally somewhat difficult, flintlock weapons, and how slow and deliberate the animations are, is built up even more by the game's horror atmosphere. All the ghosts in this game make noises from a different animal, and it's way more effective at being unsettling than you would think. The Spaniards make bear noises, the crawling ghosts make mountain lion noises, and the native ghosts make loon noises. And things get even worse when you're in the spirit world. The only person you meet that is alive is the Red Lady, and everyone else is either a skeleton or some kind of demon. It's a very lonely game, and everything from the tension and the intention of the combat to the highly underused and underrated historical setting, to the strange sound design of the enemies, to the constant references to tragic murders, and, if you prefer, the oppressive black and white color palette, all combine together into a very unique tone for a video game, and I think that's why this game sticks with the few people that play it. As far as Betrayer's faults, I have a pretty short list. I already talked about the storytelling problems and maybe the map showing its hand a little bit too much, but by far the worst part about the game is that the sound mixing is kind of rough. I finagled with the slider for sound effects a lot to try and find a good balance, but at the end of the day, some things still sound a little bit too quiet, and every time you ring the bell to change worlds, you're gonna blow out your subwoofer. It's a little annoying, but it's not something that isn't manageable with some options menu jujitsu. Sometimes controls felt a little bit unresponsive, especially the tomahawk throws, but again, this was just a slight annoyance. Melee attacks have a very odd hitbox. I think it has something to do with how short the character's knife is, but these are all very small gripes. Betrayer is a good game, and it's definitely worth the buy if you want to play a more unique open-world first-person action game. Plus, it's only $5, so it's not like we're looking at a large upfront investment here. If you want to see more videos like this one, consider subscribing. A like and a comment also really help out. And if you're already subscribed, consider hitting the bell and turning on notifications. I also have links in my description to my Twitch channel, which I stream on from time to time, and my active Discord community that is doing whatever I'm putting up on the screen right now. And finally, you should follow me on Twitter so you don't miss any important updates. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.